finally, the time has come to give our two previous videos some context. You see, the Ruined King is interesting not only because he's been the most anticipated champion in the history of League of Legends, but because technically throughout the history of our channel, we have already released 4 videos covering his story. And keep in mind that up until now, the Ruined King was just a side character. So now that the king finally stepped forward onto the main stage, it is time to cover his story in its entirety, together with the points of view of his followers. So without further ado, let's have a look at the story of Viego, the Ruined King. Side note, I am aware that the Ruined King game will give us even more lore. So at the very least, expect a 6th video on the Ruined King in the future. Our story begins in a hidden kingdom to the east, far across the seas, whose name lies all but forgotten among the ruins that dot its shores. Some of you may have heard the name Camavea, which was supposed to be the kingdom's name, but it was already confirmed that due to translation issues, Riot decided to change that. So although we now know that the kingdom is somewhere to the east beyond Ionia or the Shadow Isles, we still don't know its real name. Anyway, Viego was born as the second son to a dynastic king, which means that although he was a prince, similarly to his father's younger brother, Vladimir, he wasn't the eldest son, and so he wasn't meant to rule the kingdom. So instead, Viego enjoyed his selfish life full of comfort. That all changed when Viego's brother unexpectedly died, and suddenly, even though he lacked the training or devotion to do so, Viego found himself wearing the crown. He didn't really care about the fact that he was the king, until he met a poor seamstress called Isolde. At first sight, he immediately fell in love with her. So taken was he by her beauty, that the young king offered her his hand in marriage. And thus, one of the most powerful rulers of the age was wed to a peasant girl. Their romance was special, because suddenly Viego, who had rarely shown interest in anyone else other than himself, devoted his life to her. And soon, the two were inseparable. Viego rarely went anywhere without Isolde, always lavishing gifts upon his queen, and his attention could seldom be broken when she was present. Of course, the duty of a king is to all of his people, and so this charming love story would quickly take a dark turn. Slowly, Viego's allies started getting angry, because no one was able to interest him in governance, and with the nation beginning to unravel under his questionable rulership, some plotted in secret to end the king's reign before it had begun. And at the same time, the kingdom's enemies saw this as an opportunity to strike. This escalated when one day an assassin threw a poisoned dagger at Viego. The king was well defended, however, and instead of hitting him, the dagger was deflected and cut Isolde's arm. The poison worked quickly, and Isolde fell into a coma. All the while, Viego could only watch in horror as his wife's condition grew ever more serious. Overwhelmed with fury and despair, he spent every last coin within his coffers trying to save her. This included buying a ship for his loyal personal guardian, Kalista, and sending her across the seas to other nations in hope of finding a cure. And while Kalista was away, Hecarim of the Iron Order was appointed the new personal guardian. But none of this had any meaning, as soon Isolde perished in her bed, and Viego was consumed by madness. His search for an antidote became desperate, crazed. Unable to accept his wife's death, every treasure of the kingdom, every scrap of wealth, was sacrificed to his quest to return her to him. As the land slowly fell into chaos, Hecarim, having taste for sadistic slaughter, enjoyed trying to bring the kingdom back to quote-unquote order. What I mean by this is that Hecarim liked to lie to the king, and he made up problems just so the king would let him raid villages. Also, it didn't help that Viego hid away together with Isolde's body, becoming hateful and violent himself. But then, Viego saw a glimmer of hope. After her long journey, Kalista returned from her quest to find a cure. Now, during her journey, Kalista learned about a land shrouded in a pale mist, only ever referred to as the Blessed Isles. Those lands were sacred, and apparently their monks knew the secrets to eternal life. When Callista approached the rumored location of these isles, the local monks saw the purity of Callista's intent, and so they parted the mists for her. After she landed in the capital city of Helya, Callista begged the monks to heal her queen. And after much consideration, since time was of the essence, the masters of the city agreed to help. If Callista brought the queen here, they would cure her. Of course, at this time, Callista didn't know that the queen had already died. So, thinking that she was still alive, the monks gave her a talisman which would allow Callista to travel to Helya without help. But they told her to not share her knowledge of the Blessed Isles with anyone else. And this is when we get back to the kingdom. You see, it was after Callista returned that she learned that the queen had already died. Soon after that, Callista fell into depression, because she realized she had failed her quest. Not only did the cure work only on the living, but the monks told Callista to not share anything about the Blessed Isles with anyone. So now, Callista couldn't even tell the king what she had found. For this seeming treason, Viego locked Callista in a cell until she would speak. And there she remained silent, until Hecarim approached her, and tricked her into thinking that it didn't matter what she had found. At the very least, it would give the king some peace. And so Callista gave in to Hecarim's calm voice, and she told him about the Blessed Isles, and about the sacred waters of life. Of course, Hecarim wanted Callista to spill the beans, just because there was a chance to see more slaughter. But regardless, Hecarim then told Viego, after which the king got together his great army, and he traveled to the Blessed Isles. There the monks told Viego that now that his queen was dead, there was no way to bring her back. Viego didn't like listening to this, and so he ordered his soldiers to slaughter anyone who stood in their way. Here is where a couple of different storylines cross. You see, although Callista was loyal to Viego, she didn't want to pointlessly slaughter unarmed people, especially when they wanted to help them. And so she tried to object, and she called Hecarim to stand with her. Unfortunately, before she could even do anything, Hecarim stabbed her in the back, after which the entire Iron Order did the same. Because this entire time, Hecarim was waiting for an opportunity to get rid of Callista, so that he would permanently become the king's guardian, and so that he could freely slaughter whoever he wanted. That's why, in her undead state, Callista is the spirit of vengeance who hates betrayers, because she was technically betrayed by a fellow soldier called Hecarim. Anyway, after this, Hecarim and the Iron Order raided the Blessed Isles until they found Thresh. Now, even though Thresh was a monk of the Blessed Isles, just like Hecarim, he had certain sadistic tastes. And so, happy to see his moronic brethren torn apart, Thresh led Viego to the sacred waters of life. Here I want to point something out. Viego had a voice line where he mentioned that Rise opened the ways to the waters of life. But as of right now, Riot cut that line from the game, so that is not true. That was only in the alpha version of Viego. So it was Thresh who led Viego to the waters. Anyway, once they were there, Viego let Isolde's body drift beneath the blessed waters, in hopes she would return to him, no matter the destruction he wrought, no matter the cost. And for just one moment, she did. Isolde rose as a horrifying wraith of shadow and rage, and in her pain, her anger, her confusion at being ripped from death, she took Viego's own enchanted blade and thrust it through his heart. The magic of the waters and the ancient sword clashed, and the chamber's energy erupted, tearing across the isles and trapping everything it touched in tortured conscious undeath. Yet, Viego remembers none of this.
I remember her sinking beneath the waters, and then...
Without a king, his country collapsed into ruin. Great nations rose and fell, and in time, even his name was forgotten. Until 1,000 years after his death, Viego stood once more, and this time he would not fail. Interestingly enough, 1,000 years ago is roughly when the Ruination happened, so Viego returned in his semi-physical form only recently. His mind twisted by the same dangerous obsession he possessed in life, Viego's unflinching, deranged love fueled his every action, his every desire, his every atrocity. The deadly black mist pours freely from Viego's broken heart, ripping the life from everything it touches. And he uses the mist to scour the world for some way to return Isolde to his side. Legions will fall before him only to rise again in his service. Continents will be swallowed by living darkness, and the world will pay for every moment of happiness it stole from an ancient ruler laid low by all-consuming love. He cares not for the destruction he causes, so long as he sees Isolde's face again. His reign is terror, his love is eternal, and until Isolde returns to him, all will fall before the ruined king. And that's how his bio ends. The final summary of what happened on the Blessed Isles. We could have also mentioned the fact that Yorick was also one of the monks, and the reason why he is able to survive in the Black Mist is because on his neck he is wearing a vial of the Blessed Waters. And we could have mentioned Maokai. He was a nature spirit of the Blessed Isles, and he survived the Ruination because he spread his roots around and dipped them into the Blessed Waters too. Lastly, we should mention that in the recent update for Senna's story, it was revealed that Senna's curse holds a bit more value than we thought. Originally, we learned that Senna was marked by the Black Mist, and that was the reason why the undead were often drawn to her. Well, in the last story, we learned that the mark of the mist was actually Isolde's soul, or at the very least it was a fragment of the soul of the queen. So the mist wasn't really drawn to Senna, but instead it was drawn to Isolde, who was in Senna's body. Then of course the latest cinematic revealed that Viego was able to capture that part of Isolde, but as to what that means for the future of the story, we don't really know. What we do know is that the next 3 champions will progress the story of Viego forward. We are getting a Yordle who will likely venture to the Shadow Isles to retrieve something. We are getting a Sentinel of Light who will likely join Lucian and Senna in their hunt. And of course, there is no doubt we are also getting Isolde as a champion too. And honestly, I am really looking forward to the moment when Viego learns his own wife stabbed him in the heart. Because remember, Viego doesn't remember that. So his reaction to the betrayal might be a big deal. At this point, I'm just hoping that the game will not add much new information to the core story of the Blessed Isles. We have already covered it too many times, and I don't want to see a rise randomly thrown in this, even though the Tellstone's Easter egg might still be teasing something.